So, hello everyone. Today as a speaker, we have Alexis Brady. Alexis is an HR manager for General Electric Company, operating as an HR leader for the core technology group. She's previously worked in the HR and recruiting for Ryder Corporate Office, Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy Group, and the YWCA. Currently, Alexis is a member of the SHRM and Global HR Blogger for Young Black Professional Network, based out of the UK. She has served as a senior HR associate of the Patriot Placement, giving job preparations and resume guidance to veterans throughout the country. At present, she is a part of the Professional Development and Civic Engagement Committee of the Urban League and previously served as a member of the Young Professionals and Leader Board Group for the Lotus House. Alexis is a former lecturer from Miami-Dade College and volunteer lecturer for Rutgers University, leading courses on leadership and career readiness. Alexis, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am super excited to be here this afternoon, and I'm just going to go ahead and just hop right into it. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up, if you see me looking down, I too have my notes. I want to make sure I give you all of the information, the good knowledge that I have, and share it so freely. And if you see me look to my left, you're right, it's because I have a second monitor here. So I know I'm going to be sharing the information on the screen, but if by chance I'm showing up at the bottom, it's not because I'm not paying attention, obviously, but I definitely am multitasking. All right, so that introduction was great. And thank you again. Like I said, I'm really excited. I want to share as much beneficial information with you as much as possible. But this is what I really, really would like to happen next. Okay. And now I'm going to be sharing some tidbits, but if you could do me a huge favor, if you could just introduce yourself by writing your name in the chat, I saw your names, or your major or your location, it would be great. It's just great to see who's in the room. And while you're doing that, I'm going to share a little bit more information about me. Can you see my screen at all, guys? Just to be sure.
No, we can't see your screen. We can only see you.
Okay, see, there we go. Let's see here. Hold on one second. Can you tell I'm not the technology group? That's why I'm HR. Okay. Let me know if you can see it now.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so now you know the whole spiel I was giving. Here we go. So now you can see. If you could, like I said before, if you don't mind, just go ahead and drop some information about yourself in the chat. That would be great. I really, really would love to see who's here, who's present, where you're from. It seems as if there's a good amount of people in the same location, so really excited. A little bit more about me is I am sort of like maybe a couple of you guys that might be on this call. I actually had to do a career change. I started out as a therapist for the Florida Department of Corrections, and I worked with male inmates initially, giving therapeutic services, and then I transitioned over to female inmates, and then I was like, therapist needs a therapist, and decided to do something completely different and switch my career over to HR, which is what I've been doing for the past few years. So that's a little bit about my background. And like I said, definitely excited, definitely happy. So why don't we just hop right into it? So one of the things I think is definitely beneficial is the learning objectives. By the end of this workshop, you'll definitely get some information around addressing different types of interview questions that may be asked in the interview, those difficult questions that could be asked in the interview, and those uncomfortable questions that could be addressed in the interview. And then we're going to practice some effective interviewing techniques. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. Pre-COVID, it was a little bit different, right? Now that we're in the middle of COVID, I would say that COVID accelerated the fact that we as recruiters, the fact that we as HR people, we leverage technology for the interview space. It is no longer an option to kind of get comfortable with the camera. It's now a skill that's a definite requirement if you want to be successful in virtual world interviews. And I'm going to share that with you in a little bit. So our agenda, we're going to do a review of the interview process. We unfortunately are not going to do roses and thorns of interviewing. I definitely, I took that one out just because I felt that there was a lot of good information I wanted to share in the rest of the content. I'm going to share with you the top 2 challenging interview questions, but not just the top 2 challenging interview questions, the most anticipated top 2 challenging interview questions. I think once I tell you what they are, you guys will be like, oh crap, yep, that's totally it. And then I'm going to share with you an interview rubric. An interview rubric is to give you the insider perspective of how we as recruiters look at things, we as HR professionals look at things. And everything, guys, that I'm giving you today is solely based on the fact that I have been a recruiter in some capacity over the past 5 to 6 years, not just recruiting across the entire United States, but I've done recruitment globally for a software company as well. And then I'm also going to be sharing with you that inside knowledge of being the HR manager, having conversations with people leaders, knowing what we take, what we're looking for in terms of hiring, and sharing that with you. So you're getting the best of both worlds. And then lastly, I'm going to share the virtual interview tips and the best practices. So if you want to come off mute, you absolutely can. No harm, no foul. If you just have a question, you want to hop right in, I'm totally open to it. Feel free to unmute yourself so that I can hear you. Otherwise, definitely just please stay on mute. So the background noise, if by any chance you're somewhere or you're moving or you're not the only person at home, definitely I can make sure that everyone can hear the information. So let's start by this first. Okay, so this is going to look, if you look at this screen, it has 5 various steps. And the information that's on this screen is a review of how I look at the end-to-end process from the time you have a conversation with or submit your application to the time of a potential hire. Now, most people say the application has absolutely nothing at all to do with the interview process. In fact, in my humble opinion, it actually does. I don't know if you guys kind of hear this, and I don't want to go off on a tangent. I don't know if you guys hear this, that you have to make sure that your resume is specific to the job or tailored to the job, etc. It is very true. The reason being is when I, as a recruiter, take my 5 seconds, no more than 30 seconds to look at a resume, I'm looking for specific keywords. And another side note, if you have those beautiful pictures at the top of your resume, or if your name is taking up the first quarter page of a resume, take it off, only because I only have so many seconds of time to look at something. And if my eye doesn't catch those keywords in terms of skills or software, etc., I'm just going to quickly move on to the next until I find the person that I'm looking for. So you don't want to get distracted. I know they're lovely templates. I know Microsoft Word has templates, but definitely try and stick to the meat and potatoes at the top so that we can see that information. So going back to this process, yes, it's important. The resume is solely important because, again, when I look at it, I'm looking at it from a recruiter's perspective, and I'm going, can this person do the job based on what they have in their resume? And if you get a call from a company saying, hey, we want to do a phone screen, which is step 2, or hey, we want to do a virtual interview, or have you speak with the hiring manager, that means in their mind, they more or less feel that, okay, this person meets the basic qualifications. Let's look for those intangibles, those soft skills, communication. How do they present themselves? And let's dig a little bit deeper into their background, those things that they say is on their resume. Let me discover a little bit more. So count yourself super lucky, and you should be really excited and celebrating if you get an interview, because in our mind, we're saying on our end, when we extend it to you, that this person is qualified to do the job. So the application is your first impression. And don't say on your resume that you're detailed oriented and it has like all these errors and stuff. Because let me tell you, managers do pay attention and they go, they can't be that detailed oriented. And depending on the quality of candidates, boom, your resume goes in the garbage. Okay, just being honest. Or you get a nice thank you email. So after they do the review, then you get that intro call. Maybe you get an email saying, hey, we would like to talk to you. Maybe they call you on the phone. And typically steps 1 and steps 2 are pretty much the same. So typically in each of the interview processes, typically you submit your resume, they find you on LinkedIn, maybe you talk to a friend, then you have the introduction call, and the introduction call is when they get a little bit nosy. They start asking you compensation questions. They start asking you career goal questions. And then they also ask for examples. In this call, they're trying to see, okay, it may not be that you didn't interview well, but let me be honest. We know the salary range that we're willing to pay for a position. And if you're too high, then no bueno, you're not going to fit for us because we know we may or may not be able to afford you. And then depending on your career goals, I'm going to be completely transparent. When we open up roles, we in HR partner with the recruiters, partner with the hiring managers to determine what's the future plan for this role. If this is a software engineering role, is it going to be a senior software engineering role in 2 years, depending on how well the person does? Or is this going to turn into an architect role, a technical architect solutions role, because of what's happening or what we're anticipating in the organization? So in your intro call, when you're sharing all this information and you're telling them, if they say, well, what do you see yourself in 5 years? It's really because we're trying to see if it's a good fit for what's also happening on that team and within the company. So that's just a couple of tidbits. They may say in the background, oh, you might get a reply of, oh, that's awesome because this role is going to do blah, 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 blah. You say, well, they might reply and say, well, this role is more of X, Y, Z. Don't know if that's ever happened to you, but that's how we determine if we should also proceed with the candidate or not. And if you get one of those, oh, you know, blah, blah, it may not be a best fit. That's because we're thinking, okay, eventually this person, if they're not doing what they want to do, they're probably going to leave the organization in 6 months or a year. And so more than likely, companies want people that's going to stick around for a little while because of the investment that we put into them and the costs associated with that. So usually step 1 and step 2 is the same for every company or organization. Step 3 through 5 is where it gets a little bit different. This is where it looks a little different within each company for a technical interview. Depending on who you spoke to in step 2, if you spoke to a recruiter, if you spoke to a hiring manager or whomever, will determine what happens in step 3. Is it the first formal conversation with someone on the interview team? Is it a group interview, or are they going to do give you a technical assessment if they decide to do that? It really just depends on what the hiring manager decides. But in a technical interview, you can anticipate that more than likely they're going to want to assess those skills. And so if you have a technical assessment, they're very difficult if you've never taken one, more oftentimes than not. And we know that we're not expecting the person to solve the problem. We're really not. We're actually oftentimes just want to see how you get to, what's your thought process, how you think, what's your skill set to achieve a specific outcome. And then we look at that to determine how that works within the team and does it match for the skill set necessary for the role. So sometimes I've seen people get really, really frustrated and they go, oh my God, this is, and they want me to do this in 24 hours. Give it your best shot, but more often than not, it's not meant to completely solve, but to see what your level of skills that you have and what knowledge you actually have. So definitely give it 100%. So when you're interviewing across the board, even if it's a Zoom interview, I encourage you to treat every interviewer the same. And you're probably like, well, duh, Alexis, we know that. But when I say treat them the same, I mean, you treat every single person like they are the hiring manager. And the reason why is because, so if the recruiting coordinator or the HR coordinator or the office assistant or whomever schedules the interview, you treat them as if they're making the decision. You treat, if the hiring manager says, hey, I want you to interview with Bob, you treat Bob as if he's the hiring manager, and you rock it with Bob, you rock it with the assistant, whomever. The reason being is because in each organization, no matter which company you work for, whether you're working for GE, which has 250,000 people, or if you're working for a smaller company that has 50. In each company, there are influencers, there are decision makers, and there are the people who hold the bag, AKA budget holders. And influencers pre-COVID probably can be different. They're different in any organization. And if I can give you an example, pre-COVID, think of a receptionist, right? You go, you sit, and they say, hi, you're welcome. Then you sit down and you're there early, so you pick up your phone. Or you just really blah with the receptionist. In every company that I've worked at, I've never seen this fail. GE, Ryder, Louis Vuitton, the YWCA, that I've worked in HR. Each person that has greeted that individual, the hiring manager and the leaders or the recruiter has always asked, what did you think? That person, that assistant is considered an influencer. And they say, no, they were on their phone, blah, blah. And then someone else said, oh, I saw them on the phone when I was walking by too in between interviews. That's not a good look. Or they say, well, that person really didn't seem that nice. And if they want someone who can get along with the team, they may take that into consideration and look to see if that shows up anywhere else in the interview process. What does an influencer potentially look like in the virtual world? Well, an influencer in the virtual world could be anybody on the call. It could be a recruiter. A recruiter is the gatekeeper to the company, and a recruiter is having a conversation with the hiring manager, and the hiring manager say, well, what did you think of so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And the recruiter can say, well, I like their credentials, but I wanted to see how they did with you, so I passed them along. But I thought, they seemed okay. And if they see that they get that same vibe anywhere else in the interview, depending on what else is out there, if it's not a difficult role to fill, or if they don't have to fill it right away, it can be the difference between an offer and not getting an offer. The other thing is the decision maker. The decision maker very well usually typically is a hiring manager, but the decision making can also be the person whose going to pay your salary. And some people think, oh, the hiring manager is the one whose budget it is. No, not necessarily. Depending on the size of the organization, if it's a larger one, then it probably isn't. If it's a smaller one, then it could be. But usually hiring managers, if it's like a senior manager or manager, they have to get permission because it's not their budget. It rolls up through someone else. And they're saying, hey, I want to validate this hire for this person. And if you just so happen to interview the decision maker and you didn't know, and the decision maker or a budget holder, no bueno. So make sure you go very hard across the board with anyone in any interview, showing exactly who you are. And maybe you guys were already doing that, but those are the behind the scene reasons as to the why. So here are those two interview questions that can be a little bit challenging, that people say, oh my goodness, they know it's coming. So we know these questions are coming, but how in the world do we answer them? And I'll admit, before I got into the HR world and before I understood and kind of could piece things together and was having conversation after conversation after conversation, I was one of those people, because I, like you, will go on Google, take advice from friends who unsolicited advice. I was telling them look for it, and they would just tell me stuff, right? And so I was just like, golly, I know they're gonna ask me this question. How in the world do I respond? And it would rack my brain more than give me an example of a time that you had to work with someone difficult. These two. So the first question, tell me about yourself. Let me give you the easiest way possible to answer that question. And I developed this and haven't failed since. Okay. First of all, you're going to do is 3 words. It's past, future, present. I'll say it again. Past, future, present. All right. So when you go into an interview and you're interviewing in the virtual world and they start off with the classic opening line, tell me about yourself. Oh man, I just spilled water all over my desk. Sorry. Tell me about yourself. The first part of that is going to be, you're going to give a high level overview of your past. You're going to tell them about your future. And you're going to tell them about your present. You're not going to do past, present, future. That's for, I don't know, something else. Past, future, present. So let me give you an example of what that could potentially sound like. Say I'm in an interview and they go, hi, Alexis, thank you for coming. Tell me a little bit about yourself. And my response is going to be something like this. It'll be, well, I spent the past 6 or 7 years doing hybrid roles within various organizations. As you saw from my resume, like writer and GE and the YWCA. So my roles mostly encompass a hybrid position of recruiting, where I had the opportunity to focus on a little bit of a national and then international recruiting, specifically more so in Europe. And then I also had the HR functions and responsibilities and had an opportunity to work and support my director and VP in succession planning and talent reviews and compensation analysis. Ideally, though, in the future, I see myself really staying in the HR space. It's not that I don't love recruiting, but I feel that I'm more passionate about supporting employees. But right now, in terms of what I'm actually doing, it's a pretty good fit for me because it's giving me an opportunity at GE to explore the talent development. So I still have some exposure to recruiting right now because I helped to build a talent pipeline for GE. But most of my attention on a day-to-day basis, and if I had to give you a number within a week, I would say 80% of my time is spent more in the HR function and 20% is spent in recruiting. And in the future, I would definitely like to be 100% HR. Bingo. Past, future, present. You just told them the perfect tell me about yourself answer, and it just pretty much solved it for you. And just make sure you do it within 2 minutes, just really on a high level overview about yourself. So the next question that I see people struggle with, and I used to struggle with this one too, is what are your strengths and your weaknesses? And usually what I found people to do is they go on Google and they go, what are the best strengths? What are the best weaknesses to say in a job interview? Maybe you've spoken to your college career coach, or friend, or something like that. Let me again give you the easy way of answering that question that alleviate the most headache. So what I would do if I were you, and here's a suggestion for this audience, is if I know I'm preparing for an interview at a company, I'm going to pull out that job description. I'm going to print it out, look at it, and I'm going to go, let's see here. What are the technical skills? What are the job requirements, right? The job responsibilities, they have it listed. We're not going to pay attention to that. Our resume got us past that point. What we are going to pay attention to is those desired characteristics at the bottom that says things like team player, collaborator, etc. Now, why am I mentioning more of soft skills? The reason being is because it's already been proven, and research shows every year we come out with a top 20 list of skills that companies are looking for in employees. And yes, a lot of them are technical, but the top five, 3 out of the top 5, actually soft skills. It's hard to teach someone how to communicate. It's hard to teach someone how to be a team player. It's hard to teach someone how to collaborate. And in fact, you probably can't. Either they can do it or they can't. It's within them as individuals to be able to operate in that fashion in a cohesive environment, and an environment where there's synergy. So when I look at the job description, if I got invited to an interview, in my mind, it's not because it's because I can hit the technical mark. And if you're interviewing for a technical role, they're already assessing other areas and other ways to see if you can do the job. So maybe you had the assessment, in the interview they ask you for examples and things like that. So how do you show those soft skill sides? Because soft skills in the virtual world or working in a team environment is going to be extremely necessary. So if they say on the job description that I'm looking for someone that's a collaborator and an excellent communicator and blah, blah, blah. Guess what my strength is going to be? Now, it has to be, make it be truthful, okay? But find a strength that's in the job description that'll work for you, that you can talk about, that you can give an example. And what happens is when you pick a strength from the job description that you agree with within yourself, when you give your answer, you sound more confident, and what the hiring manager hears, what the recruiter hears, is how you're actually a good fit for the company. Why? Because it's in their job description. So that's how you do a strength. How would you do a weakness? A weakness, it's okay. It's okay to be honest. I encourage it. Don't do the opposite. Again, don't go on Google and give us a canned answer. We know canned answers when we hear it. So what's an example of a canned answer? I work too hard. And you very well may do, right? But saying I work too hard, or I don't know when to stop working, or XYZ, sounds a little bit cliche, right? So what you can do when you're talking about your weaknesses is to be honest, right? One of my weaknesses, and my biggest weaknesses, and maybe you've seen it in the PowerPoint session already, is attention to detail. I have to edit and then edit, step away, come back, edit again, step away, come back, edit again. That's my life. When I'm looking at, when I'm creating documents, right? And so when I go in interviews and they say, hey, tell me a weakness that you have, I'm honest. Now, even though I'm honest, I don't drag on my weakness, right? Because you don't want them to really think about it. Like, yeah, like my attention to detail, I'm really not, no, we don't want to do that. So we flip it as a positive and we keep it brief. So if I get asked that question, I'm going to say something like, one of my areas of opportunities are, I'm going to rephrase it, right? I'm going to say one of my areas of opportunities, or one area that I'm more focused on, is my attention to detail. It's something that I'm definitely aware of. And one of the things that I've done to overcome that, or to kind of work through that, is I'll proofread my emails before I hit send. And then I'll also double check any communications before I share it with any team or any other person that will be reviewing, reading the documents or reading the assessments. Boom, that's it. They know a weakness, and they know I'm not exaggerating it, making it a big deal, and they know what parameters I have in place to kind of check myself, which is another check, because they're like, oh, she's self-aware, right? Okay, she knows, her areas of opportunity, her growth. There is no perfect person. There is no perfect employee. So no need to pretend that you are. But when you mention a weakness, make sure that it's quick, straight to the point in what you're doing currently or what you have done to kind of address that, and then boom, move along. Okay. The other thing I would say is the behavior-based questions. The behavior-based questions, you may have heard of this method. It's a very popular method all over, and it's called the STAR method. And if you've heard of it, great, because that means you probably have been doing your research. Maybe you've spoken to someone at in the Career Center. Maybe you've had conversations with friends. Maybe you heard about it from some webinar or training or Google itself. I don't know. But definitely I encourage any person, when you're asked a question, to use the STAR method, because it gives a complete picture. And so STAR method is just situation, task, action, and then your results. And so I'll give you an example of the STAR method. If you are asked, hey, Isabel or Yara, tell me about a time that you had trouble, had to deal with a challenging or difficult situation while in school. If I think back, then the answer could be fairly easy. So remember, situation, task, action, results. Then I'm going to say, there was a time. You always want to make it, not hone in too much on negative, make sure we give the positive piece as well. There was a time I was working on a group project, and there was this one person in the group that had been really engaged at the beginning, but towards the middle of working on the project, we noticed that they weren't communicating as much. So I had a conversation with the rest of my team members, and we decided that it would be great if I could approach the team member or reach out to them, because we didn't know what had happened. Maybe something had happened to them, or maybe there was an emergency that we weren't aware of. So I reached out to the team member, and we had a great conversation, but unfortunately they failed to contribute further in the way that we needed them as part of the group. And so we rediscussed, how we should proceed forward, and decided that, the best course of action at this point, after failed attempts and emails, was to just let our instructor know. Our goal was not to get the person in trouble, but to make them aware of the situation, so that, we, the remainder of the team, could be successful. And so we conveyed that to the instructor. And so what the instructor decided to do was to allow the person to complete the project on their own. And then the rest of the group members, we just finished the project together. And we did well. We got an A-, and so we were really happy. We were a bit nervous for a while there, but it came out really good. Boom. Situation, task, the actions that you took. The situation in this case would be that the team member was irresponsive. It was a group project, stopped helping, didn't do anything they would need to do. The tasks were, and the actions were re-engaging, identifying how to engage and reconnecting. And then the outcome was that the group, unfortunately, had to split up, but that the team was successful. So that would be a good example. It gives a complete whole picture, and that's something that I would use. So here's one of my favorites. Here is one of my favorite things to talk about. Am I hired? An interview rubric, okay? This is the interview rubric that I found years ago that I've tweaked as I've gained HR knowledge and experience. And I'm sharing this on this call, and we're going to get to technical setup and all those things in a couple slides. I'm sharing this on this call with you guys so that you can really understand, again, how we as recruiters, HR, and hiring managers think when we're trying to make a decision about moving someone forward in the interview process and about hiring them. And so larger companies tend to have what we call scorecards or rating systems. So when you, and maybe not even larger companies, there are smaller companies that just do their job well, and they might have this in place, depending on the volume of candidates. But I've seen it more often in mid-sized to enterprise level companies. I've not seen it in like companies smaller than 2,000. So what they do is they have these scorecards that automatically go out and automatically attaches it to your profile that the manager responds to and can say, yes, rate them up 4, 10, or whatever the scale is for their scorecard, make comments, etc. And then everyone on the team can see this information, right? And so this information, I'm going to share with you 4 specific areas that I think will be helpful and beneficial for you guys to think about. The first one is first impression, okay? If you see here, I have appearance and I have promptness, and then I have a scale of 1 to 4. The 4 in this group is hire. Hire right now. Do not let that person get out the door. The 1 in this scale is like WTF. Like what? Why did they even show up? Like, I just wasted my time. What? I don't even, no, that's a 1. The 3 in this case is, okay, the person was nice, but I can be convinced otherwise, right? If an interviewer comes to me and says, she was good, I really liked her, or if they say, no, then, cool, but let's see what else is out there. We a potential hire, but let's hold off. And then 2 is just like, just not a good fit. So let's move forward. This is how I want you guys to think about first impression. I'll give you an example that I used to share with my students, to my freshman students, to connect and help them to understand. So this is what I would tell them. So I would say, pretend you're on a date, right? Or this is the first date, right? Your friend introduced you to somebody, you magically match with someone who wasn't cuckoo from Tinder. They seem pretty decent. You guys have been texting, and you guys decide you're going to have your first date and you're going to meet up. And you're there and you're ready and you have your outfit together and everything's all nice and you're on time. And then the person shows up late. They didn't call, they didn't text. Your first thought might be, are they okay? Right? But if they show up and they show up like, oh, I'm here for my interview and it's like 10 past, or I'm here for the date and it's like 20 minutes later, whatever the case may be, you're probably going to be like, what? Like, wait a minute, you clearly don't respect my time. Okay, maybe I'll let that slide. I don't know, depending on how late they are. Second point, appearance. Let's say first date scenario again, and you guys decide to go to this really fancy restaurant, Chateau Miami, I don't know, I'm making up something. And you're dressed to the nines, you're feeling great, confident, smelling good, took extra time on your hair, and this person shows up in their favorite jeans and lucky shirt. And you're looking like, what? Like, do you not know where we're going? Like, we're going to Chateau Miami. Like, okay. And depending on how you feel, what's happening, you probably, you may not go for it if we're being honest with ourselves, right? So that's how we as recruiters, HR, hiring managers, look at candidates the same exact way. So when you show up late, we're like, they can't be that into this job. They can't be that into the company. They can't be that into wanting to find out more about us and seizing this opportunity because they're late. They didn't call, they didn't send a smoke signal, they didn't send a pigeon with a note. No, they're just late. Not a good look. Then, if you show up and your attire isn't what it should be, then it's like, hmm? Like, no, they're not that into us. And so the message that you want to make sure you're sending is, yes, I am into you. That's how we want to feel. And how do you do that? By first impressions, showing up ahead of time and actually being in the proper appearance. And so overall appearance, a 4 for getting hired is showing up on time, excellent eye contact, just overall confidence, very well groomed, appropriate dress. Now, I will say that different companies have different interviewing policies in terms of what to wear. Some companies, if they're business casual, they'll tell you to be business casual. If they're casual, they'll say, hey, the interview attire is casual. If you don't know, ask, because you want to blend in with the culture. And if you're one, you show up late, no eye contact, that's that WTF, like what the heck, why are we here? And you just bombed it, like you just rolled out of bed. The 3 would be you're well groomed, maybe, maybe you make minimal eye contact, you show up on time, but your clothing, you have an dress shirt and slacks, but your dress shirt is out instead of tucked in. That would be considered like a 3. So, criterion for communication. 1 being the lowest, 4 being the highest is really, really important. So, again, from a recruiter, if I go, boom, I want to hire Stacy, I have to hire Stacy. For her to be on my team, this is what I'm looking for. Stacy is attentive during the interview. She's able to tie back her experiences. Remember when we talked about the job description? She's able to tie it back. She can tie it back to the role, etc. She speaks clearly. He or she speaks clearly. They convey enthusiasm for the role. And enthusiasm just isn't how I'm speaking to you guys right now. Enthusiasm says I'm showing up ahead of time too. I'm enthusiastic. I want to be here. But communication isn't just those 4 things listed here. Communication is that nonverbal, and we all know that. How many of us have had conversations with people and you say, hey, are you okay? And they say, I'm fine. And their lips are saying they're fine, but their body is saying, no, I'm not okay. So we got to make sure that what we're communicating with our body, our posture is there. And we also want to make sure that our listening, which is a big part of communication, is there too. So are we really hearing, understanding, and comprehending what they're sharing? And can we give effective answers in response and ask appropriate questions? So that if a person can accomplish those things in terms of communication, I'm like, I got to have this girl right now. Hire her now. And I'm going to be honest, sometimes if you don't get hired for a role and you do all of these things right, it has nothing to do with you. I can't tell you how many different scenarios in which maybe we close the role or the manager decided, oh, I don't want to hire in Miami. Instead, I want to hire in Los Angeles. Or you have a hiring manager who thinks that there's these unicorns out there where it's this perfect person who fits all their profile, and they'll say, oh, hold on, but we know that we have a rock star right in front of us. There's a variety of reasons, so just know that what's for you is for you. There's always something going in the background, even if you're a rock star, 100%, okay? And it could be that maybe they know your career goals too, and they go, oh my gosh, I don't want her to get in this role, and she won't be happy here. And so a 3 would be, yeah, you're there, you engage, but maybe, you're not as knowledgeable about certain things as they would like for you to be, etc. And then just 1 or 2 is you're not even showing or expressing the appropriate level of interest. You can't articulate your goals. Sentence structure and grammar isn't there. And honestly, I mean, I don't see a person like this getting past a recruiter call. The last one I wanted to mention that I think is important for any interview is responding to questions. And responding to questions for me is a pretty big deal. When I think of the ideal candidate, I think of someone who's shown interest in the business or in the career field. Now, again, depending on the size of the company, and this is what I do when I'm researching companies, I know we go to Google, we type in the company name, we go to YouTube, etc. But the first place that I go, again, not all companies have this, is when I go to Google, I go to the company website, I look for press release information. Press release information typically has what's happening within the company, like how they're doing, if they're rolling out new products, their financials, any major projects, etc. And I'll look that up and I'll go, oh yeah, okay, this is great. And then it gives me some great material to consider in the interview process to ask about. If it makes sense, or if I want to insert it with the right person, is definitely helpful. And it also gives you an idea of what's actually happening in the company. But what if there is a smaller company and they only have a website, or they have like how do I say, just an address on Google or something like that, then I would just study the website, and trust me when I say this, we know, because I've worked for one smaller company before in HR and recruiting, we know that most people don't know the company or the brand. So we're not expecting you to come in and nail it and rock star, but to see that you gave effort is a good thing. And saying like, and even if you don't give the right answer, like I've seen people get hired who are off, but they tried, but we know internally our business is a little bit hard to understand, or we don't have a lot of good information out there for them to even like understand it. So we don't expect people to come in and blow us off our feet with our mission, vision, statement, history, but the fact that they took the time to attempt to understand this stuff. So when you're responding to questions, making sure that you are able to connect the dots between your capabilities, your strengths, and then also the manager, I was going to say people leader, that's a GE term, the manager, the recruiter, etc. And if you do have any major gaps of employment, I've been there before. I had to start from the bottom. I couldn't raise my hand and say, oh, I want to be an HR manager. No, I started as a contractor. I had to get some experience underneath my wings. And when I started as a contractor from a temp agency, then I was like, okay, now I can go here. And then I busted my butt at Louis Vuitton, and then Louis Vuitton connected me to Ryder, and then Ryder connected me to GE, and it just kind of progressed from there. But if you do have any employment gaps, there's a way that you can express them. And my information was like at the beginning of the slide, and I put it in the chat because I don't have enough time to go into this, but there's an easy way to address employment gaps and put it in a positive way. But it really just depends on what the situation is. Were you a caregiver? Was it medical? Did you decide to go back to school? What were you doing during that time? So it's really a case-by-case scenario. And I really don't like giving a blanket statement because there are a lot more questions that I need to ask to really understand, but it can be done. And so that's what you want to make sure you do. Inappropriate answers to questions is a 1 or a 2, and then that I can be convinced otherwise person is they probably explained the gap well, right? They probably explained it well in the answer question, but then there's just someone else that has the icing on the cake that reaches that 4. Now, you want to also be careful, especially if it's medically related. Like there are certain laws about what should be asked during the interview, but if you decide to share that information, then that's on you. But there's more to that. Just be careful around gaps and medical reasons and things like that. So we have 2 more slides, and then we're opening up for Q&A. So here are some interview tips. The next tip is about the technical setup piece and how to conquer that in the virtual space. Um, what if you're in an interview and you don't have the answer to the question? You're like, man, the career lady didn't tell me this. I didn't hear about this in the conference. Google, what? YouTube, where did they pull this question from? Like, what the heck? That's gonna happen from time to time. It's happened to me, and I was like, whoa, I was not prepared for that. There are three things that you can do. So the first thing, the first one is if you're quote unquote light on your feet, it means you're quick thinker, you're fast. You can actually take a pause, and you can say, you know what, I'm not, I didn't think about that question. Give me a second to think about it, right? And if you're okay with sitting in silence in an interview room for like 5 to 7 seconds and actually thinking about it and then answering it, go for it. People are afraid to take pauses for whatever reason in the interview. Never have I ever met one hiring manager, myself included, because I've had a team of recruiters that reported to me in a different company. Never have I ever met a hiring manager who said, this person took a pause and I don't want to hire them, and they were still an interview. I've never heard that happen, seen it happen, and I anticipate it would never happen because we don't remember the pause because we remember all the positive things about what the person said, right? So if you're comfortable with taking pauses, just go ahead, take a pause. It's okay. And then answer the question. If you feel like you're going to be feeling a little bit awkward and not confident in doing that, then don't do that. One of the things I taught myself that I used to do, again, this one depends on the person, is I taught myself to give myself some time by stating the question back to the person while I think about it. Now, not everybody can do that, or not everybody wants to do it, but if I get asked a question again, Alexis, tell me about a time you had to handle a very challenging or difficult situation, developing talent pipeline. I'm like, oh man, talent pipeline. I thought we were going to be focused on employee engagement. I didn't realize you were going to talk about talent pipeline. And I'm like, crap, I wasn't prepared for talent pipeline. Employee engagement, yeah. Succession planning, yeah. Recruitment, yeah. Talent pipeline, no. So what I would do is I would say, well, a time that I've experienced some difficulties around, and there were a couple with talent pipeline and building that, blah, blah. I give myself at least 3 to 5 seconds to state the question back. And while I'm stating the question back, I'm thinking of the answer. So yeah, that's a very good question. So I've definitely had some challenges with developing a talent pipeline. And one of the challenges that I had, boom, here go my answer. The third thing that you can do is you can just be honest. If neither of those serves you, you can just say, you know what, I really wasn't prepared for that question. Can we come back to it so I can give you an answer around it? And let's think about it. Let me think about it while we're conducting the interview. 9 times out of 10, the person is going to say yeah. I've been in situations where I've interviewed folk or been a part of an interview team, or when I'm speaking to friends in my network, my recruiter network, where we've talked about this stuff. And depending on what the other questions were, there are times that we've not circled back around that question because we felt that we had everything we needed to make a decision. And then if it was something that we really, really just wanted to know because we did for whatever reason, because it tied to the role or it helped us to get an understanding of the person, then we would circle around about it. But it's okay if you don't know the answer to the question. You just have to decide maybe which one of those 3 actually serves you best. And maybe, and there are probably other techniques that I'm not aware of, and by all means, leverage those if those work better for you. But that's typically the advice that I give to people who say, like, what if they ask me a question and I don't know? Well, that's fine. So what if you're in a virtual interview and the interviewer gets up and leaves. Or what if you're in a virtual interview and you have to get up and leave? I've not seen a candidate have to get up for any reason during the interview, but I have seen a bad practice. It really gives a poor candidate experience when a hiring manager, recruiter, they get up and leave in the middle of a Zoom meeting. But I've heard of it happening, and unfortunately, I've seen it twice. And if that does happen to you, don't go picking up your phone. You don't know. Remember, as you guys see me, if you had your camera on, this is what you would see. If I got up and walked away, right, you don't know what I can see on my screen. You have no clue as to where I really am, what I'm doing. And if you're doing something that's could be looked at as not professional, then scratch it. Now, if something happens or something kind of comes up and you need to reschedule, then do that. It's okay to say, hey, I mean, if you've been waiting 10 minutes, they should be respectful of your time too. And it's going to be a thing to think about. Wow, if they can get up and walk out in the middle of an interview, is this a team that I want to work for? Of course, you're going to have other data points to tell you if that's a yes or no. This is just like a fluke. But if everybody's late and then they show up and you have to beg for information, then that's the sign. But if it's just a one-off, everything else has been perfect, then it's just an isolated incident, and you should treat it as such. So if that so happens to you, then, just reschedule. So here are two questions that I'm hearing as I speak to my friends, my colleagues, that sometimes are asked. Maybe you've encountered these already, maybe you haven't. But tell me something about you that is not on your resume, or is there something I didn't ask that you would like to share with me today? So if you get asked these questions, this is my safe bet of answering them. I just reaffirm my interest and my commitment to the job. And I do so by aligning it with some of my values, my personal values. Maybe I volunteered somewhere, and maybe some of those skills, whether it's technical skills, soft skills, kind of go with the role. And I share that with the interviewer. It reminds me of when I was applying to college, right? They always talk about GPA and they always talk about SAT scores. Are your GPA or SAT scores? Well, what else do they ask you for? They ask you for a recommendation letter, right? They ask you about your clubs. They ask you, right? Even though the GPA and the SAT scores may be more heavily weighted, they're looking at the complete picture of the candidate. And same thing, that's why this question is being asked. And don't share anything about about your marital status, your age. No. What you can share is the fact that you enjoy maybe a specific hobby. Maybe that's reading a book every month. I know that's what I do. I try and do two. Sometimes I do one. And honestly, I miss my goal and I'm stuck in one book for a while, for a few weeks. Maybe it's a gardening. Maybe it's the fact that you do enjoy volunteering. Maybe it's the fact that you like spending time with elderly relatives. All of those things says a lot about you as a person that you could share. Stay away from my kids, just in case you get the manager who's like, oh, they have kids and they have to get off. And if that's the case, you wouldn't want to work for a company like that, to be honest. But stay away from kids, stay away from marriage, stay away from medical, stay away from sexual orientation, stay away from disability. It's none of our business. We shouldn't be asking. If you decide to bring it up, then go ahead, but you're protected by law not to disclose those, because that can be discrimination depending on the questions. So that's what I would do. I would tie it back to values or volunteering or something like that, and just reaffirm your interest in the job through those things. The very last slide, and then Q&A. So the very last slide is the best practices to prepare and ace virtual world interviews. And so when I think of virtual world interviews, I kind of go with the notion of like I told you guys at the beginning, you have to, it's a necessary skill. It's not an option anymore. I mean, quite a few of us do TikTok videos or videos for Instagram or whatever platforms. I don't know, Facebook. I don't even know what Facebook has because I'm not on there. But we're maybe comfortable in front of the camera, but now you really need to practice that skill because this is the way of the world. And this is the way of the world for the future, especially for the foreseeable future, right? And so with technical interviews, I always tell people this. With technology, no matter how much you can prepare, expect the unexpected. Expect the unexpected with technology. So one of the things that you should do in preparing for a technical interview, those of you who are from Miami like me, know that Miami traffic can be crazy, right? You could get on I-95 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you'll be going 25 miles per hour and you look and you're like, what's happening? Is there an accident? And you finally get through all the traffic. No, it's just people can't drive. That's all. And so when I'm preparing for an on-site interview, if I was going in Miami, what I would do is I would anticipate that there are people on I-95 that may not be the best drivers today, right? So I have to plan for that. And so what that planning looks like in the virtual world is computers. You know your computer better than anyone. If you're like me, I tend to leave my computer on, both my laptops. I need to give them a break. Usually the only way they get a break is if they die. And I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to charge it. And they typically run all night. No bueno. If I was interviewing in the virtual world, I would give my computer a good old restart, right? So get its juices flowing. And then the other thing I would do when I give my computer a good restart is to make sure I close out all of those windows, right? Because you don't want all of that happening in the background. And it's just too much. You want your computer just be able to focus on the virtual Zoom interview. If by chance your screen freezes in the middle of an interview, this is what you should do. Now, I'm a fan of Microsoft Teams. I don't really use Zoom too much, but on Teams, I've had this happen fairly frequently where my video would freeze and I would just click the video button, click it, and then unclick it, and then poof, there I am, back to normal. So I can't speak for all platforms, but in the event you did have to pop off and you had to pop back on, be cool. Be cool, be easy, it's okay. You don't want that energy to kind of get you, oh my gosh, yeah, I gotta get back on, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. One, you should have their contact information. They should have shared that with you. If they didn't share it with you, then you should have, the recruiter, the hiring manager, somebody's contact information in the event that something happens, that you can text them and say, hey, I'm getting everything back together. Unfortunately, I was disconnected. I'll be on in 5 minutes. Keep your energy low. The time you hop back on, stay calm. Just, when I hop back on, just say, sorry about that. I was gone for a little bit, but let me repeat what I was saying, right? If you handle that with such grace, you better believe we're paying attention to it. You didn't get frazzled, you didn't get out of the box, and you knew how to handle yourself in an unexpected moment, which is a check plus, right? Lighting. If you're in a room with windows, super important. I think we know this, right? We have lighting rings. I feel like everyone has them for their phone, for their laptops, for their homes. You can use that for lighting so that we can see you. They fairly, I think you can get them for $35 now, or maybe even cheaper. I don't know. On Amazon, Alibaba, or the website. I think that's the right website. I don't know. But if you're in a room with the window, don't sit with the window behind you because then it casts a shadow over the front of your face and we really can't see you that well, right? And so you look like somebody who's on 60 Minutes who's telling the story and don't want to be identified. And that's not what we want. So if you're in a room with a window, make sure you put the face the window, or if you're in a room with a window and you can't face the window, close the blinds and maybe get a lighting ring if you don't already have one already, to help you out in front of you. Now, with the camera angle, if you see here to your right, if you see this lovely young lady, I put an X on the picture to the left and a star on the picture to the right. And if you can guess, the picture to the left is because she looks like she's looking down, right? I'm looking like I have to look up at her a little bit. And so what is super helpful is if you actually stack books, or if you have a laptop, I forget what these things call. I got mine off Amazon too for 14 bucks. Doesn't match anything in my house, but it works. A laptop riser, I'm gonna call it, a laptop riser, so that you can be eye level. Subconsciously, it feels like you're communicating directly with that person. That would be most helpful. Try and stay from stuff being in the background. Reason being, although your background may be nice and pretty, let's be honest, sometimes people get distracted. You don't want your interviewer to get distracted, and you don't want to go, oh, I have the same shoes, right? They may not say it out loud, but they may think it in their head. And so they totally miss all that good, juicy stuff that you were saying because they were looking at your shoes or looking at the painting or looking at the color of your wall or whatever the case may be. So definitely make sure. And in terms of colors, clothing, keep it solid, keep it, to the culture, stay away from stripes, stay away from patterns, because the camera, and depending on the camera and the lighting, it may pick it up and look a little wonky. I don't know if you guys have seen that before, and it's just like, so busy on the screen. Get away, get away. So clothing and makeup, keep it light, keep it nothing too heavy. And then again, make sure you have the contact information for the recruiter in case of emergency or technical issue. So last 2 minutes and we're done is interview prep. So while you're conducting your interview, make sure you print it in you're on the screen, you have your monitor, make sure you print out your resume just like you would if you were going in person. Make sure you have your pen and make sure you have your notebook just like you would any other interview, right? Because you should be still taking notes, right? What I would encourage you to do, just like I did with you guys at the top of this call, is I said, hey, just so you know, I have my notes with me. I have a monitor to my left, so you may see me from time to time. Look at the monitor. You're going to do the same exact thing. At the top of the interview, you're going to let them know, just so you're aware, I do have a copy of my printed resume with me, so you may see me refer to my resume from time to time, and I also have a notebook and pen so that I can take notes. Reason being, they're not in the room with you, right? They can't see you. And so they can only assume, and what our brain likes to do, and that's why we call it assumption, our brain likes to try and connect the dots about what's happening, and based off their previous experiences and what they're seeing, their brain is going to give them a scenario about what you're doing. You don't want that to happen, right? You're going to give them that information at the top of the call. The other thing is to print a copy of the job description. You may or may not use it. I just like to have it handy and right there next to me so I can kind of refer back to different points of the questions that I want to ask about the job. But you may also have a job page. I don't know that you've had notes, but I like to have it just so I could, if they say something and I look at the job description, I go, oh my gosh, well, let me ask this because I see this in the job description, but they're saying that, like, what is that, right? Excuse me. That's super helpful. Another good thing with the job description, and I'm going way, way back here, is if when you're applying for a job, if you know the company has competitor companies, if you can, I would encourage, and this will help you come up with some really good creative questions. I would actually look at the competitor companies job description if you can find it, just Google it or go on their careers page or something like that. And it doesn't have to be in the same city. Typically, the job description across the entire company is typically the same. And see if you can find that information. That'll be helpful for you to assess a little bit more about the scope of the role in other companies, and it can help you to really ask some creative questions. I already talked about the notebook. I already talked about the pen. The very last thing I'll mention, and maybe this should have been under the technology portion of it, is make sure if you're interviewing with headphones, make sure you have a second pair of headphones, or make sure that you have headphones, period, just in case for some reason your computer, they can't hear you, you plug in your headphones, let's say the first pair goes out, and you're like, oh man, like my computer and my headphones, or my headphones, just have a second pair right next to you. I've actually seen this happen on a call where a young lady had her headphones and she couldn't hear a lot, and she was like, oh my gosh, these headphones have been giving me problems. I don't know what's been going on with them. Give me 1 second. And she reached and she had another, like she didn't have to move, another headphone. She plugged in, boom, boom, boom. And then she just kept talking. She was like, oh, can you guys hear me now? Yeah, we can hear you. Okay, perfect. And she just kept talking as if nothing had happened. So that's pretty much, I think, everything. I think I spit it all out. I went over the time. I don't know how in the world I thought I was going to do a break room and all this, but I think this is great information. Definitely, hopefully excited that this was helpful for all of you guys. And if you have any questions, I think I'm ready to answer them. Nice.
So there's a question in the chat that says, how do you deal with nerves during a virtual interview?
Oh, God. Okay, can I give you a true story? I was nervous before I started today. I always get nervous. I get nervous before interviews. I get nervous before presentations. No matter how much I prepare, no matter what I do. So whoever asked that question, I definitely feel you and I'm empathetic and I get it. So one of the things that I do that helps me with my nerves, and it's good that you're nervous. If you're nervous, that's good. Because if you're not nervous, that means you're overly confident, probably cocky. And what happens when you go into an interview with that energy, you're not paying as much attention to your responses because you're like, oh, I got this, right? I'm just responding, blah, blah, X, Y, Z. If you have too many nerves, like to the point where you're like jittery, it's too much, then, you know, you're not going to be able to concentrate. So a good level of nervousness is actually a really good thing because it keeps you focused, it keeps you alert and in tune. So two things that I do that's really helpful, and I don't know if we'll ever get rid of these nerves, right? But two things that I do that's really helpful is I prepare. Like I don't wait till the last minute to prepare for any conversation, any interview, any workshop. I'm preparing like the week before, the week leading up to it, and the night before, I'm relaxing. Like I'm not looking at any notes. I'm watching 90 Day Fiance from Sunday night in case I missed it, or The Neighbors. And then something else that I do is I'm a person that practices visualization or meditation. And so I visualize myself being successful. I know it probably sounds corny if you don't do it, but between the two, between one, practicing what you're going to say, it's kind of like a muscle in your brain, right? When you get in an interview, guess what? It'll come back, or if it doesn't come back in that exact verbiage, it'll come back in some form because you've practiced it over and over, and to store it back there, your brain will pick it up. And then the visualization, it just helps to visualize myself being successful, visualizing myself asking those questions. And I actually pretend that I see them nodding and being like, yeah, yeah. Because what happens when I go in, I'm anticipating them being engaged. And if they're not engaged, I know my stuff so much, and I know I practice myself being confident that what they do doesn't necessarily impact me.
So we have a few questions on the chat right now, but we had a question while you were talking. I'm just going to read that out.
Yeah.
It says, does STAR method answered have to be work related? These questions are more general, correct? So the situation is based on whatever the interviewee decides?
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is, can the STAR method be used for any type of question? Is that more or less what they're asking?
Yeah, I feel like what they're asking is if the STAR method is more general as opposed to more specific.
No, 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 no. STAR method can be used with any question, any question. Even if you get a question that's really, and I know I gave you like really high level for the sake of the workshop and timing, but if you get a very technical question and and let me rephrase this. When I say it's good for any question, it's great for questions and when in which they're asking for you to take them through steps of how you got from A to Z. That's where you use STAR method, right? So if they're saying, share with me a time where blah, blah, or talk to me about when you encountered XYZ, you're going to have to walk them through a series of steps and tell them an outcome. And if you're going to have to walk someone through a series of steps and tell them an outcome, STAR method is perfect, whether that's behavioral based or that's technical or otherwise. If it's just how do you like your previous manager, please say something good, don't say anything bad. Then something like that, you or your previous company that you work for, what didn't you like about your previous company? And then the STAR method wouldn't apply. But any question in which you have to share steps and then the outcome, definitely use the STAR method. And I hope I answered that question.
Yeah. So there's a question. I know eye contact is important, but is it okay to look at the screen while the interviewer is speaking, or should I keep eye contact at all time?
They said to look at the screen?
Yeah. Is it okay to look at the screen, or should I just keep eye contact?
I'm assuming this is a virtual interview, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're doing a virtual interview, I would try to do eye contact at all times. It gets a little, there's a healthy amount of breaking eye contact, right? Like you don't want to be the person just like eye contact. Like that makes me nervous. So what I would say is a nice healthy break is if you have your notebook and your pen, even if you don't feel comfortable, but majority of the time, and I'll give you ratios 75 to 25, be making eye contact, and then the other 25, or maybe 70, 30, be taking notes, right? Remember, you've already worked. So even if you need a little bit of a break because the eye contact is a little heavy and it's a little weird, just doodle something, write some good information down that maybe you can follow up on or send in your thanking or something like that. So yeah, you don't want to be the person just staring in the screen the entire time. There's a nice little balance of disconnect so that all parties feel comfortable.
Right. I think she's asking if you should look at the camera or the screen, because eye contact to the camera. She just clarified that in the chat. So.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. So one of the things that I do is I don't like looking in the camera. So if the person's on my screen, I actually look at the screen. I don't look in the camera. And I've not really encountered many people who do, to be honest. And if you're looking at the screen, you don't really see much significant difference, depending on what part of the screen that you're looking at. Like right now, I'm looking in the screen, right? You're gonna notice the difference, right? I'm still looking in the screen, but now I'm looking in the camera. And then now I'm looking in the camera again. So it's up to you to make kind of decide. But I don't think it nicks you we haven't done that at all.
I think I lost a question up there. Okay, so as an older woman with gaps in work history, how do I stand out in interviews as compared to younger applicants?
So I think the first thing that I would do is start with the resume, because there can be discrimination there. I know typically with resumes, it's usually chronological order, chronological, like where are you working and from this year to this year, that year, blah, blah, blah. I would get a really solid functional resume to capture your skills. And if you've dealt with, quite a few career gaps or something like that, that would be the resume to go. And if the resume got you in the door to the point where you have an interview, and at that point with the functional resume, they're going to ask, they're going to say, when were you at so-and-so, or when were you at XYZ, or whatever the case may be. So what you can do is you can say, depending on the situation, again, I don't want to give a blanket answer, but if it's medical, you can say, it would really just depend on what it is. I'm going to be honest. If you want to reach out to me one-on-one, I'm more than happy to talk to you and walk you through it and give you some pointers for your specific information. Because if it's a medical situation, you go down that medical route. When it's illegal for them to ask questions, they may look at that as an opportunity to probe further. And if you look at the opportunity to probe further, you don't want to be discriminated against, because then they feel like, oh, well, will she have issues all the time? Will she always have to go to the doctor? If it was a caregiver situation, most people are very empathetic. Like they say, hey, I took time off, I had, family issues from 2000 to 2005, and then again from 2017 to 2020, excuse me, I'm making everybody old, 2020, in which I had to address, and these are the things that I was doing during that time. But while I was away from work, I stayed abreast of the industry. These are the skills that I developed, and this is what I worked on. These are the connections that I established. So if you're having conversations about a skill gap and you feel comfortable in acknowledging them, you really want to be able to speak to the fact that you have some sort of skill, and again, tie it back to the job description, that'll definitely play in your favor as to why you should be hired. Ultimately, that's going to be the biggest thing that kind of helps you get through that gateway, is finding a way to tie it back to the job description, but also communicating on the skills that you built, because clearly if they're hiring for a role, they need somebody with some understanding and knowledge of the industry and the particular role, and you have to be able to speak to that. But it also shows that you weren't just like completely out of touch, but that you were still committed and finding a way to stay engaged and abreast of the trends that were emerging in whatever particular field you're looking to stay in.
Okay. So there's another question. How to be prepared for compensation and benefits negotiation with confidence after the initial job offer?
After the initial job offer, if they made you an offer, they probably asked you, what's your current salary? Every state except for the state of California, the only state in which it's illegal to ask this question is the state of California. The state of California has passed a law, I think in 2019, maybe, that companies can't ask what's your current compensation. That's wide open for the rest of the United States currently. And if you work for a very large company like I do with General Electric, they make a blanket statement of we shouldn't ask anybody their current compensation, just as a practice across the board. So if they made you an offer, probably in that phone screen, step 2, they said, what's your current compensation? I try and tell people to get around that question. One way that you can do that is you can say, is there a range for the position, right? So what's your current compensation? Well, is there a range for the specific position, or is there a range that you have in mind? Recruiters typically don't like it because they're like, they just want to see like that number, because for one or two things. If your resume or if your profile is really good, then they want to see if they can afford you. And also the second thing is that they want to see if they can get you without hitting the top of the budget. That's what they want to see. Like, okay, if they're making $60,000, they should be happy with 65. Whereas if you never told them your compensation, you probably could have got 80 or 85. I've done it. So one thing that you can do is you can say, another thing that you can do, you say, well, based off, you can do two things. You can say, I'd like to find out a little bit more about the role and the total benefits package. And I think that'll give me an idea of the of what type of compensation would be fair for this position. Another thing that you can say is, I'm sure that, like, if they say, oh, what are you looking for, or what's your desired compensation, you can say, well, I don't think, I'm really more so focused on the role. I'm sure that we can come to a resolution about what compensation looks like if you find me to be a suitable candidate and extend me an offer. So those are the three ways you can get around it. Now, to directly answer your question, if you get on the tail end of it and they extend you an offer, depending what happened in the beginning, it's going to determine how this offer negotiation goes. Because if you gave them numbers at the beginning, it's going to make it a little bit harder if you're not happy with that. If you played that numbers thing and you gave them, well, what's the range, and or let's take a look at comp, then you definitely have wiggle room at the end. But if you made a mistake and gave them a number and they gave you an offer that you really weren't expecting, you thought you were going to get a little bit more, then I would go back to that original piece that I shared before, and I would say something along the lines of, now that I've learned more about the role, well, first I would ask for the benefits package. Hey, can you share with me the benefits package so I can have a review of it? Once you got that benefits package in hand, then I would go back and say, once I learned a little bit about the role and I saw the benefits, benefits of the position, I am looking for a compensation of blah, 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 blah. If they want you enough, they'll give you the money. I'm just being honest. I've seen managers move mountains, especially but it depends on the urgency for the role. But if you ask and they come back and they say, well, I don't know, blah, blah, say, well, let's negotiate. Can you meet me here? And then let them go from there. But let them tell you yes or no on the first offer. And people are afraid to negotiate. Companies don't want you to negotiate. Recruiters don't want you to negotiate, but you should never take the first offer unless it clearly states in like the position description, this role pays $25 an hour and you apply to it anyway. They let you know up front. But if they have a range or something like that, ignore the ranges.
Okay, so how early should you log on to a virtual interview?
Just to make sure everything works, I would say like 10 minutes. 10 minutes is fine.
Okay, so there's another, I see job descriptions that say must be able to lift 50 pounds or more. What is the purpose of this? Is it to limit it to men?
No, I've not known it to. It's probably because you would potentially be actually doing some sort of lifting. But I will say this for all my ladies on the call, I don't know if who exactly is on the call. I will say this, make sure that you apply to jobs. Women are less likely than men to apply to a role. What women do is we look at the job description and we go, okay, yeah, okay. And we feel like we have to check all the boxes. Men go, okay, all right, well, I can Google that. That's not rocket science, right? And they apply anyway. We when we write job descriptions, okay, in all transparency, we're writing with a unicorn in mind. We're hoping that we'll get this lucky person who meets that, but in reality, it's never happened. I've never seen it happen. Never. I promise you, it's never happened, and it won't. So if you more or less feel like you can do the job based off that, even if you don't meet a few of the qualifications, apply, because in the background, we're actually flexible. And I've seen that across every company that I've worked for.
What if you have an interview, but the interviewer does not turn on his camera? This happened to someone I know and they were uncomfortable with this. I would be too. What do you do if this happens?
Well, my first question would be, did they request that the person have their camera on? Was that communicated in the piece? I'm assuming that probably was. It is an interview, they want to see you. In that event, completely honest, it is totally uncomfortable, but it's not really much you can do. If you feel bold enough to say, hey, it would be great if we can interact together and I'll be able to see you, feel free. I personally wouldn't do that. It's a very tough position. I empathize with your friend, because I've been on work calls and I'll be on video and the other person wouldn't, and I'm looking at initials and I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? It's weird, right? But if they can get comfortable just practicing and just talking and being confident, it doesn't matter. And the other person not being on camera, 9 times out of 10 doesn't have to do with the interviewee. It has to do with the interviewer. The fact that we're working from home, I can't tell you how many stories, conversations I have of people who just roll out of bed. And I'm one of them. They just roll out of bed and I'm here, and they don't want to be seen that way. They might not be at their best, or maybe they're not in a working space or something like that. So if you have that situation, although it's uncomfortable, you just have to do your best and kind of roll with it. If you're bold enough to say, can you cut on your camera, go for it. I personally wouldn't do it. I would just be confident and let them see that no matter what, she's amazing, and go from there.
Okay, I think we have one more question. How can we best compensate for lack of experience with a certain tech skill, which when asked in an interview?
So one of the things that I would do, you can't get around certain skill sets, right? Let's say you put certain skills or technical software on a resume, right? And you get in the interview and they ask you, based off your resume, they see that you have experience with, I don't know, JavaScript, I don't know. And then so they ask you about a related software. Well, what's your experience with blah, blah? And you're like, well, they didn't say that in the job description. And clearly, like I said, if you got to the interview portion, they feel you can do the job, okay? If they ask you something about a software that you're not familiar with, but maybe you've been exposed to. So 2 different things. Let's say you've been exposed to the software, like you've seen it, you're not really familiar with it. It's sometimes hiring managers, even though they're hoping that someone has this other skill set or this ability, they're okay with teaching someone the skill set. So if you've been exposed to something, even though you don't have direct experience, say, I'm not too familiar with it. I don't know the ins and outs, but I've been exposed to it. Like I've seen it, I've gone in, but I've not used it for any projects or anything like that. But if you show me the dashboard, I would recognize it, etc. Now, if you just completely A to Z don't know up from down or anything about the software platform, be honest and say that, and say, I'm not familiar with that particular platform, and then ask questions, show that level of curiosity. Is this connected to X, Y, Z? And then if they start answering questions, yes, it's very similar, blah, blah, X, Y, Z. And what might end up happening is you might discover there may be similarities between platforms, and say, oh, well, yeah, if I can do this, then it seems as if I will be able to do this within this specific platform. If they're just 2 different platforms and they're just asking you, like in general, just be honest, say you're not familiar. but you're eager to learn, you're willing to learn, you're excited to learn, and ask a question about it. You know, like, is that the how does the company or the team leverage that platform? And it could be something simple. They were just thinking about making a change from their current software to another one, and they just wanted that idea if you used it before, right? It could be anything. So just make sure you probe and ask the right questions, because you never know what the answers might be, and while they're asking, you might get a different outcome. So don't be too worried about it.
Okay, I think we only have time for, I think we crossed the limit. It was
Yeah.
4:15, but we do have a few questions. I just want to say that if you have some unanswered questions, you can always go to the session description and put it out there, and then someone will send it to our speaker. And obviously, Alexis just put in her email, so you can reach her out on that as well.
Yeah.
But that is all we have time for. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank
You're
you, Alexis, for
welcome.
doing
Thank
this.
you. Feel free to reach out. I'm totally open to doing virtual coffees and all that stuff. So reach out to me. I like meeting people, if you can't tell. Thank you, guys.